Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of VMTV Vaults with myself, Kyle Diamond. And for this episode, it's an extra long one, so you might want to grab yourself a drink and have a sit down, because for this one, I'm joined by the outlaw himself, Mr. Dan Hardy. Me and Dan spoke about UK MMA and the challenges it still faces in improving the regional scene. We spoke about the content that he's been making with BT Sport and, of course, his own channel, Full Reptile, after leaving the UFC just over a year ago now. We talked about UFC London, Whittaker versus Adesanya 2 this weekend, which is an incredible fight. Loads of great stuff for you to get into. So without further ado, the man himself, Dan Hardy. Sweet. So we were just talking before we hit record about the UFL 8 event, which has caused a lot of controversy. And you yourself are not opposed to speaking out about things when they need to be corrected. When you look at it, because you're a guy that has come through regional promotions and have seen them grow and working with them and things like that, what do you feel like are still the biggest hurdles, I suppose, in making these smaller regional shows as professional as they can be? Because I know the EMMA lately, we've had them like recognize shows like Meltdown and stuff like that become affiliated promotions because of how well run they are. So what's the biggest hurdle still blocking that?
I think it's I think it's having some control over the industry as a whole. I want shows every weekend. I want there to be as many MMA shows as possible. But the issue is, running an MMA show comes with an expense. You have to make sure that you're getting good judges, good referees. You need excellent officiating. You also need to make sure that you've taken care of all the medical criteria that needs covering, making sure you've got people there on hand, making sure that the fighters have been, medically checked before, making sure that the matchups are evenly made and all those kind of things. And this, back in the day when I was fighting, it was very difficult to get a fight because there were so few people doing it, but everyone doing it would show up. Right. If you managed to get a fight booked in, your guy would show up. And now it's not the same anymore. Like, we have a squad of guys, 20 or 30 guys, amateur and pro. And the biggest problem is getting them matched and keeping them matched. Like, some guys will go through 3 or 4 opponents before they get there, to the event and they've actually got a fight. And often we don't know anything about these guys. We don't know what their medical history is or what's been checked by the promotion, coming into the fight. And that's a concern for me, because like, everyone looks at MMA like it's indestructible, like it's here to stay. And we're still on very much tender hooks. Like, if we had a tragedy happen, it would really set us back a long way, especially UK MMA, which is, we're kind of behind anyway. Other areas of the world, they've got, like Sweden and, some other areas of Europe, as well as, of course, the US and all the athletic commissions. They have people that they have jurisdiction in these regions, so we can make sure that the events are being ran well. And that's a part of the reason why I've become a part of the English Mixed Martial Arts Association with, Mark Goddard and all the other guys, because we're trying to protect MMA. What we don't want is to see people stepping onto shows that are, 0-26 and they've got no medical history, recorded or anything like this. That's a danger not only to them and to their opponent, but also to the event and the sport itself. So the biggest challenge is just trying to take a hold of it before something terrible happens, because there are a lot of people there that are looking to get a handful of cash and be a cage fighting promoter, the type, and they're not really thinking about MMA as a sport and what we need to do to look after it. That's the biggest hurdle, really, is the people involved that aren't the actual martial artists themselves, could just kind of running away with the sport.
Do you feel like, obviously, the MMA is a huge part of helping that? That the fact that that wasn't in place before seems kind of crazy, but obviously now it's here. It's a great step. Do you feel like that the standard of regional shows will? I feel like it's safe to say it will improve as MMA grows and there's more money in it, because you like you said, you can put more money into things like officials and having the right health teams and stuff there in place, because you haven't got to worry about making your money back as much. You're just going to generate more money. But also, I suppose, is there a bit of a double-edged sword where you're going to see more people seeing MMA as an opportunity to cash in whilst it's growing?
Well, I mean, this is where we're at the moment. There are people that look at MMA as an opportunity to put on a show, fill it with amateur fighters, and they're not doing the background research into these guys and to their teams, and and making sure that they should be fighting in an MMA fight, amateur or pro, it doesn't matter. They're still getting punched in the head with small gloves on. Like, because there's money to be made out of it, we're always going to be getting people coming in and trying to make money out of it. And it's not until we start putting some rules and regulations in place that every fighter on the card has to have the standard basic medical testing, blood testing, eye tests, MRIs, just to make sure that we're not putting people at unnecessary risk. But again, all these things come with a cost implication. And unfortunately, if a promoter's coming into the sport to make money, these are things that they can cut corners on because no one's forcing them to do it. Like, you can't put a show on in the US. Like, when I first started living in California, I used to be at shows every weekend in gyms up and down California. We used to call them smokers. And, you go and there'd be like 5 Muay Thai fights and 3 MMA fights and, a couple of boxing matches. And it was just chaos. And, people would show up and get matched on the day, and there'd be people crowded around. And honestly, it was a good time. But of course, from an ambassador's perspective of the sport, we're putting people at risk all the time, and we're putting the sport at risk, and cutting corners is really where we need to cut down upon. And unfortunately, the people that are the ones cutting corners are the ones that are standing to make money out of these promotions. We're getting there, but we need rules in place to protect the fighters from the promotions, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, but before we started talking about this, you are no stranger to speaking out about these things. And obviously, it was about a year ago, well, just over a year ago now, right? That you had the thing with the Max Holloway card. It was the Max Holloway card. That was the last card you worked, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, that was
so about a year.
Was that January 2021. That was the last. That was the last.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk about the development of MMA and the promotions. Obviously, we had that huge PFL deal announced this week, which is just great news. But there was quite a long time where a few years ago, if you said that someone had left the UFC, not with good terms between some parties and things like that, it would have been tough to see where you go from that. But I think that the year that you've had since then has proved that, that other promotions and stuff, that there are opportunities out there and things like that. How was that year been? Because at the start it was very like, but like what's Dan going to do from here? And yet it seems like it's been such a natural transition to you to just be like, well, I'll do my own thing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's funny because during that Fight Island and after the whole Herb Dean thing, my return to Fight Island afterwards wasn't a pleasant experience. The UFC had stood in between me and the media, which was my job for the UFC. I was an ambassador for Europe, so I was supposed to be at media day and stuff. And everybody else got a seat on media day. John Gooden, John Anik, Laura Sanko, DC, they all got a seat at media day, but they kept me away from the media. And they started taking things off me because I think they expected me to speak my mind, which of course I'm going to. And I always said to the UFC, I worked for MMA before I worked for the UFC, because the UFC can fade away and MMA will still be here. We need to maintain this sport. And again, promoters, these ways of making money and cutting corners and, shut that guy up because he's causing us issues. And I must, from the UFC's perspective, I must have been a bit of a thorn in the side from the inside of the organization, because I was always saying, look, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing this. This needs to be better. And I'm here for MMA at the end of the day, and the process of working with the UFC, although I love the actual event, sitting octagon side, calling the fights, talking to the fighters in the hotel and stuff, and just kind of catching up with them and their training camp is fantastic. But all of the nonsense that comes with it, all the hoops you have to jump through, and I mean, like the UFC put me on a flight to Australia, a round trip for 2 days. It took me 56 hours to get there, and I'd be in the country for less than 2 days, and I'd be working as soon as I'd landed. It was just they just drain you to the point where you don't really have much more to give. And Fight Island was a huge drain, and that last event. So, see, this is the thing that people don't realize is. So the Max Holloway fight was the last one I worked, Holloway-Cater, which was a very stressful event. I mean, there were a lot of concerns around the end of that event, given the fact that Cater had taken such a beating. I mean, if you remember, we saw that clip of Dana speaking to what's his name, Hunter, and he was saying, we need to make sure he gets to the hospital straight away.
Mm.
Now, to me, that's all very contrived. The camera knew what they were filming. He was mic'd up. That was a get out clause because this was the first show on ABC. And if we had a tragedy, which is quite possible at some point in the sport, unfortunately, it would have been a massive negative impact on the UFC. That fight could have been stopped by the corner. It could have been stopped by the referee. Dana was concerned enough for the branding of the UFC to go and speak to the corner during the fight. So after that event, I mean, it was a high strung event anyway. It was the first time we'd had a few people back in the crowd. As soon as the event was over, I went and worked the ESPN desk, and then I went and got a couple of hours sleep before I started having to work the McGregor Poirier fight for the next week. So I was just burnt out. I was just completely burnt out, and it was a very frustrating weekend for me. Do you know what I mean? And in the last year since I've not been there, I've realized how much it was depleting my health. How much the traveling back and forth and the stress of being a part of the UFC in the background, and incredibly stressful. And now, obviously, with all the nonsense that's going on with fighter pay and all the movement that's happening within the sport, I'm in the right place now. I'm outside of the UFC, so I can comment objectively on everything that's happening with mixed martial arts. And before, I had to have these conversations behind closed doors, and they always fell on deaf ears. So now I feel like I can speak out and make a bit of progress. And ultimately, I have my gym and my team. Like, people could leave me alone and you can never hear of me again. And I just train my guys, and that would be me content. I don't need to be on stage with a mic in my hand. I don't need to be sitting octagon side. As much as it was fun, I can be very content in a small environment on my own, working with my guys. So it's actually been quite a relief, to be honest, to have this last 12 months to kind of decompress and put everything into perspective.
I don't want to play too much on the narrative of Dan Hardy versus the UFC and things like that, but it does very much feel like there was quite a long period of time where there would be, if there was any kind of controversy around the UFC, because the UFC was so far and above the biggest promotion, it was just kind of like, it's the UFC. They're doing what they do. They deliver you great fights every weekend. Don't worry about it too much. I remember that the thing with you being a big thing, obviously, with specifically the fans watching BT Sport and stuff. It was like, but Dan's like part of it. Like, how that doesn't make any sense. And then, like you said, with the fighter pay, and we've got promotions like the PFL having that huge deal to be on the UK TV. It does feel like the UFC is being challenged a lot more, and I feel like that is going to be a big thing this year, especially with the things like the Francis Ngannou pay-per-view kicking off the year and things like that. It just feels like people are starting to challenge the UFC a little bit more, and I assume that's because of there's other avenues out there that are profitable for people, like the way that you've gone away and done your own thing, but also promotions like the PFL really rising up and stuff. Do you feel like there was that period where you couldn't really challenge the UFC and things are starting to change a bit? Because I feel like we hear more and more people coming out against the UFC kind of every week.
I do certainly think times are changing, absolutely, and I don't want anybody to ever get it wrong. I love the UFC as a brand, and as an investor into the sport of mixed martial arts. The UFC have done amazing things, and we're all here because of a lot of the work that they've done. But one of the reasons why they've got so far is because they've had so much money to spend and reinvest, and that's not been going to the fighters. And the issue, going back into the history of the sport, is as soon as someone speaks up, everything around them is shut down. Randy talked about this the other week with Ariel. As soon as he made a comment about fighter pay, it's almost like they try and slam every single door around you closed. And I realized this, getting fired by the UFC. It wasn't a case of me just getting fired. Then they go after my sponsors and tell them to stop working with me. Then they put pressure on BT Sport to stop them working with me. And it's a cutthroat and very vindictive way that they do business. And I think that's what's coming to the surface. And to be honest, the turning point for me really is going to be Jake Paul, because he has no concern about what Dana says or what the UFC do, because he's not financially tied to them. Plus, Jake Paul's got Nikisa Badarian in his corner, who was a very, very high level CFO within Zuffa. He knows the ins and outs of the sport. So now we have people that are speaking out that aren't reliant on the UFC. The only thing, the big thing is going to be people backing Francis Ngannou. The fact that we have a whole bunch of UFC champions, and I'm a big fan of Israel Adesanya, but when the news came out yesterday that he's just signed a deal making him one of the highest paid and most lucrative athletes in the sport, that really annoyed me, because he should be standing side by side with Ngannou as a fellow champion. You know, all the other champions should be standing side by side with one another. Figueiredo should be in there standing side by side with these guys, because he's been talking about getting paid more. It's not about them getting paid more. It's about everyone getting paid more. And that's the point that Francis is making. He's making a point that the industry needs to change. The contracts need to change. It's not about his pay. You know, it's not about what he's making. It's about what everybody's making and the balance within the sport. And it's definitely changes happening. You can see it by how Dana's reacting to people. You know, he's starting to snap and starting to be nasty, especially with Jake Paul. And that shows an insecurity to me.
You mentioned there about the UFC trying to get BT Sport to cut ties with you, and I think it's very, very credible of them to not do that. Obviously, they had to change things around a little bit, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times about people being gutted about no more Inside the Octagon on the UFC, but you've managed to still do the breakdown show for BT as well as all the stuff you do on Full Reptile. So I wanted to talk about that because they're fascinating to watch. But the thing that I always think about when I watch them is I'll be watching it, and for 5 minutes you've completely convinced me that this is going to happen, and then you counter it. Does that happen whilst you're preparing the show to you? Do you ever get caught up in your own breakdown where you're like, I think this is going to happen, I'm fully convinced, and then you find something else that goes against it? But do you end up switching opinions throughout making them?
All the time. And even once I've recorded it, I'll go back and think and look at my notes, and I'll go, hang on a minute, well, I've not considered this, and maybe this is a factor that I've not thought about. And there are so many moving parts within these fights. I mean, some of them are more straightforward than others. You know, like my breakdown of Glover's fight against Blachowicz. Like, you know, I mean, it's step by step. You know what he's going to do because you know how good he is and how consistent he is. But with an Adesanya Whittaker fight, there are so many moving parts to it, and the psychological parts playing into it as well. It's very, very difficult to read some of these fights, and the more I watch them, the more confusing it gets, to be honest. At some points, I mean, the Adesanya Whittaker one took me 5 days to prepare, and normally I get them done in 2 because I know the fighters so well. You know, I can sit down for 2 days, I'll research and I'll plan and I'll get the playlists edited together and send them off to BT to return to me, and then I'm good to go. But the Adesanya Whittaker one was incredibly difficult, just because there are so many different factors to it. You know, so many different moving parts, and I mean, you can never predict what's going to happen in the fight, right? I think this is where people kind of confuse what I do. Like, as an analyst, my focus is to tell you what I think is going to happen based on what's already happened, right? So, like, going into the Francis Ngannou Cyril Gane fight, I couldn't have anticipated that his wrestling would have improved so much. You know, I could see improvements in his game in the Stipe fight, the rematch, and I mentioned that. But to think that he was going to come in and be able to wrestle like that against Cyril, and to think that Cyril was going to have the performance that he did as well, where he just didn't really look himself. You know, he looked all right in the beginning, but then he started to run out of options when he started to be taken down. That's why I love MMA, because I can tell you what I think is going to happen based on what I've seen, but it's still not going to be accurate, because MMA is so random and so so unpredictable. I like the challenge, but at the same time, I'm here to be surprised myself as well.
Yeah, because you'll research these fights and then be talking about them on various shows throughout the course of the week. I know, like, obviously we caught you on a busy week with that huge rematch. Is it tough? Because speaking as someone who will film myself doing a prediction, 2 days later, I will have seen one clip of something and I'll go, he could do that in the fight. I didn't even think of that. And now I've completely changed my opinion before I've even put my predictions out there. So is it tough because you need to know what you're going to say like the week before? But it's just the case with big fights like this, where throughout the week you'll constantly be going back and forth. So across multiple, when you're doing it across multiple shows like you do, is it tough to stay consistent to that one thing, or do you just allow yourself to go to kind of fluctuate between them?
I do. I mean, I don't bind myself to anything. If I feel like I'm going to change my mind based on something I've seen during fight week, then I absolutely will. I mean, you're right. The problem with these shows is that we have to film them a couple of weeks in advance. So the Adesanya Whittaker one was filmed. What day is it? So I filmed that last Monday. So that was nearly 2 weeks ago. You're looking. And then a lot can happen since then. I mean, I'll be honest, the amount of times I've filmed a show and then 2 or 3 days later, one of the fighters has pulled out. You can't predict these things, or something will happen during fight week, which will completely change the course of the psychological factors in the fight. But I just kind of roll with it. I do my breakdown show, and then as the week develops and the fight week develops, I like to kind of go back and forth and shift and keep talking to different people and getting their thoughts and stuff. I mean, it is difficult sometimes. It is difficult, especially because I'm doing them a couple of weeks out. But at the same time, I'm most focused on the technical aspects of the game, which makes it a bit easier for me to be consistent on my prediction.
There's a few things that we have to bring up. Obviously, this huge fight at the weekend, Adesanya and Whittaker 2. I've gone through all of the content you've made for this to try and get an overall thing. But like you said, there's so many things that present itself throughout the week that it's so difficult to get a gauge. Where do you stand currently on the fight? Like, how do you think it will go down?
I think it's going to be far more competitive than the first one, because I think that Whittaker's in a different place mentally. I think he's had 3 fights that have reaffirmed himself in his own mind. I think we saw a good development against Darren Till, mixing up his takedown attempts with his striking, and I think from the second round onwards, he ran the show in that fight. I think that was a really good performance. Then he went on against Cannonier over 3 rounds and just looked fantastic in the striking range against someone that I think is incredibly tough. And then Gastelum, who's a great mixed martial artist, very well-rounded, Whittaker was able to beat him in every range and showed real good improvements in his grappling. And if I think I'm Whittaker after those 3 performances, and I look at Adesanya's last 4 fights, when he was taken down against Blachowicz and when he was pushed to the limit against Vittoria. I know he won the fight, of course, but he was taken down in the first round. He was controlled up against the fence. It was not the easiest of fights for him. If I'm Whittaker, I'm seeing confidence in those areas of the game where I feel like I can push him. I think it's going to be a very, very hard fought battle, and I think Whittaker can win it, but he will have to be on his game. Adesanya, it's far more clear cut for him. You just don't want to be tangled up with Whittaker, because at the striking ranges, he's got height and reach advantage. He's already stopped him once. The more Whittaker has, the less success Whittaker has on the feet, the more he gets reckless. So again, something else that plays into Adesanya's hands. The big question is, can Whittaker take him down, and will he be able to take him down before he gives up on the idea of putting him on the ground? Because Adesanya will probably defend the first 3, 4, 5 takedowns, but with persistence, I think Whittaker can get him to the floor, and that's when the fight becomes very different. I am leaning towards Whittaker, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's a 5-round decision where he takes 3 rounds, or whether he manages to snag him with a rear naked choke or like an arm triangle in the 4th or 5th round. I could certainly see that happening.
Another thing that if I'm talking to you that we might as well bring up, because it's getting pretty close now, the UFC London card. Every year we talk about the UFC London card and say it's the best card they've ever put together, and it just gets better and better every year. I mean, to have a card this good without Darren Till, without Leon Edwards is just ridiculous at this point. I feel like if you chuck one of them on there, you could probably turn that into a pay-per-view card. It's that good. What fights are you most looking forward to on that card? And is there anyone missing at the moment from that card that you would like to see on there?
I mean, there are a couple of people. The first one that stands out in my mind that's missing is Don Woodin. After his last couple of performances on Cage Warriors, I was expecting him to get the call up, and I'm disappointed that he hasn't, because I think it's time for him. Of course, the guys that are going to be on the card representing the UK that we're familiar with, the likes of Nathaniel Wood and Jack Shaw, they're gonna have fantastic fights and have really good performances. I think the Claudio Silva Gunnar Nelson fight is a very interesting one. And I think that's going to really get the fans going as well, because they're both. I mean, Claudio is a bit of a maniac, and he's got a really tough, durable, well-rounded game with good ground game. And Gunnar Nelson is a huge fan favorite that's got great grappling skills to match as well. So that's one I'm really looking forward to. I think that's going to be a very closely contested match. But I'm to be honest, I'm kind of glad that the likes of Darren Till aren't on the card, because it gives a bit of light to the other guys. Tom Aspinall in the main event against Volkov is a massive opportunity for it. UFC London's always a special event, and the fact that they've built it for the UK fans, it's exactly what we've needed after such a long time with it. With it not. I mean, you got to think UFC London was the first event that was cancelled at the start of the pandemic. It was that would have been a fantastic event as well. Leon against Tyron Woodley in the main event. It seems like a lifetime ago now.
Yeah.
But this card is going to deliver. It's going to be absolutely fantastic.
Of course, there's no other way for me to really end this. It wouldn't be talking to Dan Hardy if I didn't mention a comeback. It feels like every few months we get an update, and it seems it's always kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, the main issue right now is travel. There are certain travel restrictions all over the place, and I don't want to get into the politics of the pandemic, but it certainly made things difficult. And to be honest, had I still maintained my job with the UFC past January of last year, I still think it would have ran aground. They wouldn't have kept me on up until this point, and I wouldn't have been traveling to events. So that's the main issue. I've had conversations with One Championship. Of course, they're keen on doing the John Wayne Parr fight, and I'm still very much open to that. I would happily sign with One Championship and fight 2 or 3 times under their banner, especially because I've got options for different rules and really high level opponents. I've been offered a boxing match for June. That would be against a Hall of Famer, a boxer that everybody will know the name of. Can't give anything away right now, but that's a good option, especially with that being in the UK. I don't have to travel very far for that, of course. But we'll see what happens. I mean, as travel starts to open up, or if we have more events over here, or events I can get to without any kind of issues, then that will be something I'll be looking at. I mean, I'd love to fight for One Championship in Singapore. I love Singapore. I think One Championship do a great job with their events, and they have good options for me. John Wayne Parr, Nikki Holskin, Shinya Oki, Eddie Alvarez. There's loads of good options in One Championship. Then I've had a couple of conversations with PFL as well. That might be an option. I've been offered Thai boxing matches in Canada, and I got offered a very interesting professional grappling match yesterday, which I'd not been considering, but now it's been bouncing around in my head a bit. So we'll see. That's in the UK as well. So I don't know. I mean, my main focus right now is building my team. We've got loads of guys that have got fights coming up, Golden Ticket and Almighty and stuff, and they're all looking like animals right now. And to be helping them is my priority. We'll see. When the right offer comes, I'll be ready to take it.
Thank you for checking out this episode of VMTV Vaults with myself and Mr. Dan Hardy. If you aren't subscribed to Dan's YouTube channel, Full Reptile, go and do it. The content they produce over there is some of the best that you will find on YouTube. And hit subscribe on us while you're at it so you don't miss an episode of VMTV Vaults. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next one.